series, and I greatly appreciate your stamina as we've wound our way through a variety of conversations yesterday and today. I'm celebrating each of you because you are here, and it's our very last session of our two-day series, so I do appreciate that. I'm Stu Van Horn, the interim president at West Hills College Coalinga, and I'm delighted to have on the stage with me Scott Campbell, VP at CALE. You'll learn a little bit more about the Adult and Experiential Learning Organization if you don't already know about them. And then a fellow named Mike McIntyre, the president and COO of Academy One, who I first learned about a few years ago when he began to do some pioneering work through a TACT grant in the state of Pennsylvania around this whole notion of prior learning assessment. And as we've gone through the last couple of days, including our last session on data mapping, while there's some esoteric parts about it, there's also direct linkages and integration with everything we've talked about the last 2 days, and that's been regional collaboration and increased cooperation. And when you heard Rob speak a little bit about detailed mapping, well, ironically, that's also one of the 2 core objectives of California Forward and their core economic summit in their 2016-2017 strategic plan. And oh, by the way, that also dovetails nicely into the 5-year strategic plan of the California Workforce Development Board. And that is the group that funded the Regional Slingshot Initiative, which this consortium earned about a year ago. And so they're all integrated, linked actions and alliances which really support the philosophy behind the Essential Elements series. So a couple of things I heard today that I just thought were so wonderful that not a bad idea to remind them. And when you talked about, we've talked about the flow of resources. And one of the comments that I think it was Jim Mayer said, you know, new resources have reduced excuses and created expectations that need to be fulfilled. And I think that's really timely for where we're at in public higher education with the workforce spotlight on workforce training. I also appreciated the comment earlier that sort of summarized the need to have the Workforce Development Boards fund Slingshot when they talked about how do we organize the demand side, the employers, how do we engage them, how do we get them involved? What are those best practices? What can we do to incentivize? How can we put them as drivers, not responders? What does that mean as it relates to our operational relationship with employers? Is it an advisory board sufficient? Or do there need to be other integrated linked actions? And I think on the supply side, us, workforce and education, it gives us the unique opportunity to really look at new initiatives that might support this notion of regional collaboration. There's never been a time in contemporary 2-year public community colleges in California where we've had this level of commitment to each other and this level to collaborate and cooperate. And I think that to its core is really what this regionalization is all about that we've tried to emphasize the last couple of days. Well, specifically to Slingshot, as we just heard a little bit about earlier today from Blake and Tim Rainey of the Workforce Development Board. This is an initiative of colleges in the region, and the values were created around a framework the Workforce Development Board published about a year ago, and it really was to look for ways to capture upward mobility, otherwise disconnected assets, and leverage parallel efforts, look for ways to meet labor market needs in real time, and how do we put employers in front of the line. And in many cases, the work that this consortium has been doing has focused around planning, and there's been a couple of surveys, and there's been some sub-regional meetings, and there's been some region-wide meetings, and we've cussed and discussed, and we've tried to figure out how we're going to improve our relationships. Why is it that the welding class at College A is not accepted at College B? And we've talked about articulation and seeing curricula through the eyes of industry, creating new apprenticeships, best practices, how to link in adult education, and then along came prior learning assessment. And while it's not a new concept, it's a short walk from PLA to competency-based ed, but we're not going there today. We're going to stick on prior learning assessment, and we're going to share with you a little bit about a potential initiative that might really truly support the development of a regional prior learning assessment portal serving the Central Valley. And this was affirmed as a best practice in the top recommendation from the colleges in the region that participated in a survey some time ago. Every single community college within that multi-college district listed on the screen said, yeah, I'm in. Let's look for ways to create a regionalized prior learning assessment portal. Now, there's impacts to that, but there is a recognition that learning achieved from elsewhere should be counted by our colleges as a way to expedite completion and shorten time to completion. And what we're talking about now today is twofold. One, Mike, are you first or are you going first, Scott? Scott's going first? Okay, so Scott's going to come at this from a perspective of, okay, you know, we'll rely on the app developer and the software developer to make this thing work, and it'll have opportunities for incumbent workers or under-trained workers in the workforce to submit life and occupational materials through an e-portfolio that is then answered by a campus staffer who say, yeah, we'll start institutionalizing the review of your request. But then what happens after that? It goes into the academic practices, correct? And what are those now? Typically, for most colleges, it's course substitution. Maybe it's credit by exam. What we're talking about, and particularly the scale that Scott will talk about, is broadening our academic practices to accommodate the need to institutionalize the review of prior learning assessment coursework that comes in by a current, by a prospective, or a former student. So CALE has a package in their toolkit, depending on how we want to frame this in the region, that we could use to really help us walk through the academic practices. And he'll tell you it's not for everyone. Not every discipline in the non-CTE area is going to buy into this, but there are levels of ways for us to go about this, and likely it'll be anchored in the CTE area, which is probably the best place for it to start. So he'll explain a little bit about what CALE's doing there. And then Mike's going to talk a little bit about his pioneering work in Pennsylvania, how they've done this there. I think you're in Montana and Idaho now. And how this might look from an application standpoint in the software. So real delighted to have Scott. He missed his flight. He had to fly into a different city. He just got here about an hour ago. So let's give him a Coalinga welcome, Scott Campbell of CALE.
That was a wonderful introduction and also a wonderful synopsis of what we see, not just perhaps the context that Stuart's talking about in the Valley here, but across the country. The challenges of how do we aspire to really serve adult learners in ways that really meets them where they are and efficiently gets them from where they are to credential completion. So thank you for that. One of the benefits of missing my connecting flight last night, I was on the East Coast and I was supposed to connect in Chicago and come out here, was that I got to see the Cubs. I stayed at home in Chicago last night for at least a couple hours and got to see the game there. So, so what I'd like to do is share, and Mike will follow, but share just a little bit of level setting about what you may already know in your work at your institutions, and that there's a new normal that's happening in colleges and universities. And specifically, this is in some cases, it's already happened at community colleges. There we go. So, and this is information from Lumina that has been released recently, but just the idea of our non-traditional learners are at rates more than ever are balancing multiple responsibilities. They are 3/4 of them are balancing multiple responsibilities in terms of their families or kids. We have 40% attend school only part-time. And a significant number of our students are working, on average 19 hours a week, but over 40% of them are working more than that. We're also finding that our population at colleges and universities is older and more racially diverse. Only a third of college students today are what you might traditionally think of as that 18 to 21-year-old that is residential. 75% of college students today are commuting to work or to school. The Hispanic population has tripled since the 90s, and the black student population has grown by 72% in the last decade and a half. There's increasing pressure in terms of the financial support that's needed for a student to succeed at colleges. In fact, 4.8 million students, those parents are not able to contribute to their child's post-secondary education. 88% of single student parents have incomes below 200% of the poverty line. So the pressure in terms of financial is significant. We also know that if a student has significant responsibilities in terms of dependence and are working more than half-time, that they are 2 times more likely to drop out. So there is a new normal, and yet so many of our colleges and universities have systems that are really in place to serve what is really a very small percentage of our college-going population, that traditional-oriented residential student, and yet our systems are often set up to serve them. So we know some things about prior learning assessment. We've done some research at the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning with 48 institutions, 72,000 students over a 7-year span, and we found that those who have prior learning assessment in their background are 2.5 times more likely to graduate. We know that it saves time. We know that on average it can save between 6 and 9 months for an individual. And there's obviously opportunity costs in terms of opportunities to save money and also to accelerate their time to degree. Those are fairly well-known findings at this point, yet there's still challenges. In terms of the benefits to college, we know that prior learning assessment can help at least a couple of the critical decision factors for an adult when they decide on a college or university. A couple of those decision factors are time to degree and cost of the degree. We know that it can help when positioned well and put early on in the recruitment process, that prior learning assessment can help boost enrollments. We also know that those students who have prior learning assessment are retained at a higher level. They're 2.5 times more likely to graduate. And for those, we also found that on average, those students take on average 10 more credits per student. So it's kind of counterintuitive, like, well, if they're getting more credits through prior learning assessment, why would they take more credits? But through persistence, on average, they're averaging 10 more credits per student. And of course, increasing the graduation rates. The Lumina Foundation and so many of our statewide efforts are really focused on degree attainment. And there's some derivative of the 60% goal of degree attainment for college-going, for the working-aged population. And yet we have a long way to go there. So at Cale, we take a comprehensive approach. We recognize, just as you're talking about the complexity of why can't we just roll something out and have it work from on high. We know that working at colleges and universities, working with workforce and economic development sector, with industry, that there's relationships, there's complexity, there's training needs. And so we take a much comprehensive approach to implementing prior learning assessment. Academy One and Mike McIntyre, they have a wonderful tool that he'll talk about in a minute. But the surrounding that, like any innovation, like any initiative that we want to be sustainable, we need to work more comprehensively with the different stakeholders. We know that through our work at Cale over the last 40 years of doing work in prior learning assessment, we know some things that are working well right now. We know having a comprehensive understanding of what's happening at the moment, a current state, is important, and we can accomplish that through survey. And it sounds like there's other forms of data that might be able to be helpful in that way. We also know that not just the tool, but how to implement that, and working with those folks on the ground is important. And those folks need attention. So often they're on the margins and feel like they've got too much to do and not enough support. So we support those folks. We also know that the critical gateway for a student to understand where they might have college-level learning is with the advisor. It's important for many folks to know, faculty and so on, but that student's advisor, intake advisor, admissions rep, those are all opportunities for us to share that possibility with that adult learner. So many of the adult learners are coming back with some college and no degree. They're coming back to our campuses. They're not aware of the opportunity or the possibility of prior learning assessment. So, but those of us who can be proactive in sharing that, this can really be significant in their experience. We work with faculty. Faculty are at the crux of prior learning assessment. They are the folks who are assessing those portfolios or those tests or those challenge exams for prior learning. And so we want to support them, and we want to do it in a way that there's a shared understanding, not just at that institution, but across many institutions. So the opportunity to work with this consortium gives an opportunity to build trust in terms of a process for prior learning assessment across institutions, because that's where it breaks down when students transfer from one place to another. If folks are not confident that they're going to get the same answer at at another institution as they did doing their assessment, that will break down trust. And so we want to build that within our systems. The other place that we want to invest in is faculty assessor training. And we want to build the capacity for the faculty at our institutions to do portfolio assessments. And in doing so, we believe that's a great process for building buy-in from faculty on the rigor of the process. And we've had lots of success across in other states and other systems, and we want to share that and bring that to bear in our work here. I caught just the tail end of some of just the idea of the way you're working together right now, and thinking of it, we use the metaphor of an ecosystem. And so often when we're working with colleges and universities, we find that the economic, the employer sector is often ignored. And so the idea of an advisory group historically has been kind of a best practice, one where your advisory groups from the community, from employers, are often looking at the alignment between curriculum and what the workforce development needs. We've kind of taken that to a new level with regional collaboration, and I just wanted to share one example of some work we've been doing for the last decade in Colorado. The Colorado CHAMP program, the CHAMP is an acronym for Colorado Helps Advanced Manufacturing Program. And in that, we're bringing together an industry sector of stakeholders, and we're trying to develop and improve the talent pipeline for that industry. So working with 9 community colleges in the state, and there's been, advancements in what is needed from those employees. And so to design programs that help get that workforce from where they are to where they need for the industry to succeed has been kind of the crux of that work. So we start with a focus on partnerships that aim to bring together both education and economic development. This is what seems like it's already happening here, and so you're ahead of the ball game. But it also, the presenter right before us talking about having robust information is also where we start as well. We have a focus on implementation based on a solid foundation of assessed needs. So, and there's a lot of data out there. We've just actually been working with some of the San Diego community colleges on career centers and kind of reimagining what those might look like in that district. And again, we focus on research, design, and creating recommendations that could advance the talent pool within the state. So here's some things that have resulted in that collaboration in the CHAMP program over the last decade. Connected education and training options, more comprehensive support services. We really focused on not necessarily the degree, because we found that wasn't necessarily what was important to those employees. We focused on their advancement. And so sometimes that took that took the form of a certification, sometimes validating skills of what they already know and can do, which brings us to what we ultimately came up with was a model of competencies. And you see some foundational competencies, industry-related competencies, and then occupational-related competencies. And so through this process, we have now a really clear map of how an individual can advance in advanced manufacturing in the state of Colorado, and the connection of those courses and that curriculum throughout the community college system. The crux of it is not all of it happens in the classroom. A lot of this learning is happening outside the classroom. And so to have a process in which we can make that translation from what a student knows and can do to their college degree program is essential. Mike?
Well, I didn't drive down the I-5 to get here. I flew in from Philadelphia, which is where Academy One's located. Scott had flown in from Rhode Island back to his home in Chicago and then here, so I think we have the award for traveling the furthest to get here. But I'm very glad to be back in California. I spent my teenage years here in California. My father was a construction superintendent in charge of big projects. He was working for Bechtel Corporation, which I heard this morning. He was in the Burlingame office. We lived in Saratoga, California. And there was a project that was taking place in Paso Robles. And remember, this was, 35, 40 years ago. And when my father told my mother that we were moving to Paso Robles from Saratoga, all of her friends started consoling her and saying, no. And to me, it was just an adventure because we were moving from one place to another. But then I got to Paso Robles, and back then it was nothing. I hear today that it's quite the hot spot with its wineries. But then we moved from Paso Robles to Oroville, California. And in Oroville, California, they were building at the time the world's largest earth-filled dam. It still is today the tallest dam in the country, 777 feet. And we lived in a house not too far from the construction site. My dad was in charge of the site. And all day long today I heard about the water issue, the water issue, the water issue. Well, he was building a dam and filling up this lake, and we were getting rattlesnakes in our front yard and on our driveway sunning themselves, and coyotes in our backyard as they were being displaced with all the water that was coming. So things have really changed. I mean, they've changed in Paso Robles, they've changed in Oroville. But I am glad to be back in California. So this is a screenshot of a web portal that we've created for the 14 community colleges in Pennsylvania. And as Scott says, not all learning takes place in the classroom. People can have on-the-job training. They could be in the military. They can have learning on their own. And we would like to try to get them some type of credit for that. And so that's what the community colleges in Pennsylvania wanted to do. And we created a PLA platform for them, which was, as Stuart said, part of a TAC grant. The Department of Labor knew that this was a case that was taking place. There was a lot of jobs that were being displaced in Pennsylvania, particularly in the manufacturing area. They wanted to get some of those students a degree if they didn't have a degree. So this was a degree completion program as well. But the colleges also saw it as a recruiting tool, because if they could reach out to a population now that had some college but no degree, or perhaps no college whatsoever, and bring them back in and give them some academic credit so that they could move on towards a degree and get that degree faster, it was a good tool to bring them into it. So the website, gives the person some information about PLA. So the person comes to it, they could not have any college experience, and so now they're trying to learn a little bit about what they can do. The second thing was that we needed to then create, once all of these people started coming to the site, a workflow process. Because who do they call when they come to the site? Once they call, who do they get advised by? Once the advisor talks to them, what course should they take? Once they start a PLA petition, where does the petition go? How does the person get assigned to it? So there is a whole lot of activity that takes place through a PLA process, and if you don't have a good, solid workflow process with it, things can get lost. Third, the schools wanted to use their own instructors. As Scott said, by having their own faculty members doing the PLA process is a good way to buy in from the faculty to get into the process. The fourth thing was they needed to have, if they're going to be able to create a portfolio, they had to be able to have a mechanism in order to upload all of their artifacts, their resumes and their histories, and it could be a portfolio of artwork that they had created. So all of those things had to be uploaded into a singular portfolio. And then, because we're doing this across the region, or across the state in this particular case, they wanted to have good reporting metrics. So they need to measure what it is that they're doing, because if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And so by having a centralized portal that all of the students would be going to, we could then collect the data and give it back out to the institutions. We needed to then, and this is very important, is to, in terms of rigor, in order to standardize what this PLA process is going to be, because for some schools it was brand new. For other schools, they had been doing it one way, and other schools doing it a different way. And in order to create a rigor that then, when a academic transcript was being evaluated with a student transferring from one institution to another, they had some level of comfort that the student actually had met all of the learning objectives for the course that they got the PLA credit for. So from the student's perspective, and from our perspective, a software development perspective, what we want to do is we always want to make it as easy as possible for the student. We don't want it to be complicated for them. We want them to be able to go through a simple process so it doesn't seem overwhelming to them, it doesn't seem overtaxing to them in any way. So there are just some basic steps. So the first thing was, when they went to that site, they could explore different PLA options. One of them may be creating a portfolio, but another could be taking a challenge exam, either on a departmental basis, or it could be a standardized test, like a CLEP test. Or it could be something that has to do with Dante's in the military. So here, what they could do is they could explore the different options. Then what they would then do is they would submit a request. Now, this request was because some students would come on and say, you know what, I've been doing this for a few years and I think I should get credit for this particular course because I think I meet the competencies of that particular subject. Well, an advisor then becomes very important because the advisor will advise that student as to whether or not they think that the student has succeeded and has achieved the competencies in order to meet the PLA requirements. And the reason why it's important for them at this point in time to talk to that advisor is because there's a charge associated with this to the student. And they didn't want the student to come in, pay money, and then ultimately be disappointed by the fact that, hey, look, I shouldn't have even done this in the first place. So once that they've talked to the advisor says, yes, I think you should do this particular course, because the person may have said, I want to challenge a finance class, and the advisor, after talking to them, may say, well, you know what, you would be better off challenging the Accounting 1 course. So once they've determined what the appropriate course would be, the student would then create the petition. They would then create all of the artifacts that are needed in order for that portfolio. And then lastly, that portfolio is assessed by a faculty member at the institution. Now, because we're doing this at the 14 different colleges in Pennsylvania, in this particular example, to talk about collaboration. Not all schools have the same expertise, or they have a faculty member who has the propensity to want to do a PLA portfolio review. And so what they could do in the system is they could share faculty members. So a faculty member from school A may be able to assess a faculty member from a student's portfolio from school B because they have the expertise to do that. That's one of the advantages of having a collaborative single point PLA system. So the workflow process to manage that looks a little complicated, but this is a high-level, uncomplicated perspective for it. But you can see that there's different color codes on here. The blue is for where the student is interfacing with the application or the system. The yellow is where the advisor is. The orange or the pink color is the assessor. So you can see there's really not too much work that the assessor is doing in this particular system. They don't get involved until a petition is available for them to review, and they then review the petition and notify the student of the award or the decline of the award. In the green on here is an external system. And it's external because once the PLA process has been completed and the student is awarded degree, what happens? It then has to be articulated or transcripted, onto the student's record so that it will show up. That is not part of our system at the current time, but it could be something that we could actually do if somebody wanted us to create the API to do that. There's also real-time reporting, so that as this process is being managed, students, you can come in and see how many applications are in, you can see how many portfolios have been created, you can see how many petitions are out there. The system has been in place now for about 16 months. The number of petitions that they have is over 1,000 petitions now. So they feel like it's very successful from that perspective. And the Department of Labor, who's reviewed the system, has said the project and what's happening in Pennsylvania is one of the better TAC grants that they've come across. It is multi-institutional, as I talked about. In Pennsylvania, it's called the College Credit Fast Track System. In Montana, it's the Montana PLA. And if we were to do any work here, we would have to create a portal for you. We didn't quite know what that would be, if it would be a slingshot portal, or if it would be a central motherload portal, or if it would be the central region portal. Sometimes I'm getting a little confused by all these different acronyms and initiatives that you've got going on. But we would certainly welcome the opportunity in order to put a PLA system here in place for you. So that,
Mike, and welcome your questions. But Mike, circle back to the faculty piece. Talk to us on stipend and the fee for students that submitted an e-portfolio, where that money went, were faculty compensated for the assessment?
The students were charged $125 to do the portfolio review. Well, actually, they were charged $129. $125 was the fee, and $4 was a processing fee for the credit card processing that was being taken place. Of that $125, all $125 went to the faculty member who was doing the portfolio review. That's the way that they set it up in Pennsylvania. In Montana, they've decided that they are going to not charge the students anything for a portfolio review at this point in time, but then what they will subsidize a stipend for the faculty member who's doing the review. So it really depends on, right, there are options.
At Campbell, we've just done some research on business models, and some institutions see and systems see it as an investment, and that's why they come up with
No charge.
no charge,
Right.
and others, want to, break even on that, and so there's just different.
And
viewpoints.
so remind me, Pennsylvania and Montana, are those union states?
Yes, they are.
Question?
So this sounds like a great idea. Presumably, there's some sort of credentialing program that you need to go through for the community college to offer an AA degree, for instance. So, so how does the PLA affect credentialing, and is it accepted by the?
Right. Could we go back to my PowerPoint for a second? And if I can go backwards.
And Mike, just for
Yeah.
clarification here, so Russ, when you say credentialing, you mean accreditation?
Right, accreditation.
Okay.
I don't know the lingo.
Right. Right, and in terms of accreditation, you can see the blue bar sort of in the middle there that says, attention if you've been affected by a recent school closure. Now, this happened in Pennsylvania. ITT Tech, if you're familiar with ITT Tech, not only did ITT Tech close, I know they had a campus in Fresno, but in addition to that, there were two other institutions in Pennsylvania, private for-profit organizations that also closed this past year. And so they wanted us to put onto the site the fact that, hey, look, if you've been affected by one of these closings, again, they're using it trying to help the student in addition to recruit students as well, right? But we talked to Ted Mitchell. If you know Ted Mitchell, he's the Assistant Secretary of Education in Washington, D.C. And when this happened, we reached out to Ted and we said, hey, Ted, there are going to be an awful lot of students who are going to be affected by this. And from an accreditation perspective, the regional accreditors are having difficulty by saying, look, you took this course at ITT, we're going to equate it to this course at my institution because ITT was not accredited by them as well. And so because of that, one way that Ted, and this is what Ted's thought and the Department of Education's thought was that through a PLA process, if those students from those institutions can prove to you that they've met the competencies and the learning outcomes that are associated with your particular course, then we think this would be a good way to go. And so they're directing students from those private institutions that are nonprofits, profits that have gone out of business towards a PLA process. Now you get into the accreditor. So in Pennsylvania, that's the Middle States Accrediting Board. And what the Department of Education in Washington has done is they've reached out to the Middle State Accrediting Organization and said, hey, look, guys, we've got a bunch of folks here who are in a tough boat. We want to make sure that you will be kind if nothing else, open up your heart, so to speak, and help these students out as we can. And so I know in Pennsylvania's case, in middle states, they're accepting the fact that if the student can show their competencies through a PLA process, that some of those ITT courses can transfer. And some of those ITT courses obviously are technically related, welding type courses or IT type courses, and some of the different community colleges have those courses in their portfolio.
By the way, each of the accrediting bodies, the 6 regional accreditors, they all reference CALE standards in their bylaws.
Good question, Russ. Others?
So what are the majority of the students trying to achieve? Is it an associate's? Is it a certificate? Is it just skill building without a certificate?
Good question. It's all three. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. It's certificate, and degree. I mean, that's the bulk of them. Not necessarily just coming to get a skill.
One of our industry sector partnerships in Iowa, we focused on IT, and we've co-developed some boot camps, and in those cases, they were more interested in the certificate than they were the associates. But it's really industry specific.
I would say it's split between certificates and degrees. Yes.
Somebody comes back to school at 40 years old and says, I know how to read, I know how to write, I know math. So can they get their general education requirements waived by some sort of PLA process and then just go directly into their advanced learning at that point? Can they take the SAT or some sort of equivalency in order to show that they're competent in those fields?
It's by individual. I mean, so really there's an assessment of what that individual knows and can do, and that there's a filtering process that starts with the advisor. It starts with some interactive tools on the platform of questions that are being asked. But that's.
Well, I know that in the states that we're working in, the PLA process is only available to them if it's not a remedial course. So if it's right, because you're not getting credit for a remedial course, so you wouldn't really go through a PLA process. There would be some other mechanism in place in order to assess their college ability.
And Russ, in your scenario, certainly an individual could try to submit, go through the process, have it assessed, and if it is earned, and it is demonstrated that's been earned without sacrificing the integrity of the institutional policies, it's conceivable. But then there are some institutions that are using PLA that cap the number of units or courses that can be attributed to, say, a AS degree. So it's nimble and flexible enough for us as a region to determine what we believe some of those caps, if any, should be, what the costs should be for the student, what the compensation would be, what programs would be involved, those sorts of things.
Right. In Pennsylvania, they opened it up to all of their programs in the 4-year, at the 2-year school level, as long as there wasn't some type of experiential, like a lab associated with it, or if there wasn't an internship that was associated with it. So any of the other courses, they could petition for PLA. In Montana, however, remember this is the state that's not charging anybody to do it. They've limited the portfolio or the list of courses that the student can do, because they didn't want to open it up to everything. They said, okay, we will do it for this subset of our course catalog.
But is the focus, does it tend to be college level general ed, or does it tend to be technical, whether that's welding or accounting?
In Pennsylvania it's everything, and it's general ed in Montana.
And I would just say here, it depends on how we want to, how faculty would respond, what the buy-in would be, where the support for supporting this might be. It might come in pockets. It might start in CTE. It might broaden out. Hard to say for sure, but certainly the institution has that authority to determine its level and type and mix of programs that it would like to see. Regionally, we'd like to see some consistency and collaboration and cooperation. So that's the other part about this. And that's the thing about regional collaboration. It requires potentially adversaries to cooperate a little bit. So.
Well, I guess my focus as a former marketer is not on the institution, but on the consumer.
Right.
So what's the customer wanting?
Yeah.
Meaning these students.
I agree that it's where the focus should be.
So,
Now,
based on their experience, what were their biggest challenges or concerns as they were running through this process?
I would say the biggest challenge was getting the fact that the program was available out, that the communication aspect of it. If I look at what's our more successful implementations, and when I mean successful implementations would be those where there have been a number of petitions that have been put through the process. Clearly, those institutions and those systems that have put money behind that outreach program. For instance, in Pennsylvania, there are 3 major markets. There's Philadelphia, there's Harrisburg, which is the state capital, and Pittsburgh. And in those 3 major markets, they have community colleges with multiple campuses or multiple community colleges. And what they did was they advertised in print, they advertised on TV, and they advertised in the movie theaters. And so I remember coming in and watching a movie, and then up came an ad for College Credit Fast Track, and it was like, what? So I mean, they really put it, and like I said before, in the short period of time, they have more than 1,000 petitions, already going through the system. So I think that's the biggest obstacle.
I would add the challenge of the assessment of student learning has been a decentralized activity. Individual faculty folks from around an institution do that work, and so helping them have a shared process, shared understanding is a lift, but not insurmountable.
See, I'm looking at it from the user perspective. He's looking at
That's
it from
right.
the institution again.
So I have kind of an extended question. Is there any buy-in from state agencies on this? And I'll explain. In a lot of the skilled trades, there's a Department of Apprenticeship Standards, a certification process to be an apprentice, to be a journeyman. And unless you're in a trade union, there's no real cross-state or way to certify that. I mean, I've had guys coming out of state that are very good at their trade, but because there's no umbrella recognition program, I've had to put them in a really terrible class that was conducted by a clown, but recognized by the state to kind of rubber stamp what they already knew so I could comply with regulation.
Was it an angry clown?
I hope not.
Right.
I hope not.
Right.
But so thinking about my industry, thinking about some skilled labor, skilled trades, is there buy-in on the state levels to recognize this as certification toward an apprenticeship or a journeyman program for skilled trades?
Scott?
There are no shortage of states that are seeking to operate at that level. And each state is a little bit different. I'd say we're making...
Right, each
Yeah.
state's a little different, right?
Right.
Tennessee is completely different.
Tennessee is doing
right.
very well from top to bottom. There's
Right.
both a top-down and a groundswell working together. When you have both, I think is when it's going to work.
Paul,
best.
let me jump in here and give you unequivocal yes, there's interest in partnering with this, specifically in this region, and folks like Sal and Tim Woods and others know this, through the Prop 39 multi-craft path grant of a few years ago, sort of the previous to Slingshot. The building trades and the unions in this region, including apprenticeship providers, the JATCs, and even the Associated Builders Council of NorCal, the non-union shops, have all said, we need to get our act together. and that there are pre-apprentice or apprenticeships that have had some college but no degree. We now turn towards each other, facing each other, saying that's wrong. And similarly, our students who enter those programs don't have their credit recognized. And I will tell you that this is the biggest interest of Chuck Riojas, the major driver in building trades in this region, to get to a point where colleges in the building trades collaborate, cooperate academically. It's, I think, safe to say, and Tim Sell, correct me if I'm wrong, he wants to see this in place before he retires. And that's one of the pieces about our need to expand our academic practices, because at this point we don't really have a mechanism to do that.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your hospitality.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Scott. Chancellor Gornick, some final comments as we depart after 2 days together.
The World Series is over.
Yeah, if only the election was. Yeah. If you didn't hear that one, that was a good one. If only the election was over. Just a couple of things. I had to step out and go to the district office and come back. I don't know if you had an opportunity to talk a little bit, but yesterday there was a lot of conversation about everybody was willing to do things, and where were the pinch points in the process? And we particularly had this conversation last night at the reception and coming over. And from where I sit, when I talk to CEOs at the state level, part of the process is we respond very quickly to industry, but we get stuck in the process of our own organizations, but primarily at the Sacramento level. You know, approval of curriculum, approval of the same course outcomes, but worded 50 different ways as a title. Things like that, you know, that's kind of our own, we're our own worst enemy in terms of trying to respond to industry need and to streamline these things. And I was intrigued also that Jim Mayer had mentioned something about California Forward looking at a resolution last year about trying to move the academic senate, the statewide academic senate, along in getting them focused more on realizing their role in terms of inhibiting some progress in terms of what the college is and what we want to do. So it leads me to think that I think one of the things that we've always been able to do in the Valley and why we've been able to get people from Sacramento down here for this conference is that we seem to come up with ways to try and get around that. And if we could either use our consortium or, if not the consortium, what I like to call a coalition of the willing, I don't know how many that would be, to say, okay, we want to try a process like this. And we want to see, in our region, you know, we've got, I think you said the statistic, 30 to 35% of our adult population has some college but no degree. That's throughout the Valley. We could all benefit by giving them some recognition that there's a way we can give you some credit for what your work experience has been right now, or your service experience, things of that nature. And that would really begin to move us along. One other question I had for both of you gentlemen. Western Governors, do you model any of your stuff off of Western Governors? I know they have a pretty extensive process there with their...
Well, with their competency-based program, and at Cale, we've really been trying to encourage the development of that field. And there was, 3 years ago, there was 48 institutions that were implementing competency-based education programs, and last year there were over 600. So there's a huge boon in competency-based programs in all different forms. And so 95% of those, though, are not going the full direct assessment.
I got you.
So they're doing some type of hybrid format of that.
Good.
So there's still a handful that are obviously doing the
Good.
Western Governors or Southern New Hampshire or so on.
The only other thing I would finally say is that I think this is a really great opportunity for us to do something, and there are some dollars at the statewide level. There's new innovation dollars at the statewide level. And if we wanted to, like I said, either a coalition of willing or the whole Central Valley Consortium get behind something like this to kind of move it along, that would be, to me, would be a really a great innovation, and to have some industry standards to go along with us in terms of doing this kind of an event. It would be a great way to kind of move it along for us, rather than all of us having to lift it one at a time. So, but I thought it was been, Stu, I thought you and the staff did a great job with the conference.
Thanks to all the staff.
And yeah, great job. Michael, Stuart and I had a chance to attend a couple of CALE conferences, and great conferences. If you ever have a chance to get to one of their conferences, they just do an outstanding job in terms of current information for colleges to occur. And I can recall maybe 15 years ago, I don't know if you were in attendance, but Dr. Welty from Fresno State, we had the consortium, you guys come in and show us what you were setting up in Pennsylvania. And we were doing it for articulation, and then that was the second phase for you guys to bring the stuff in. So happy to see you guys are moving along in that direction. That's good. That was it. Those are my comments.
Great.
And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.